It didn't matter if you were too young to drink, drive, or vote. If you wanted to play professional baseball, you had to sign a piece of paper that allowed one team to own your services for the rest of your career, unless that team traded, sold, or waived you. If you didn't like the way the team paid or treated you, you were warned to keep it to yourself. And most did. Then one day, one man said, no more. His name was Curt Flood.
December 24th, 1969. Dear Mr. Kuhn, after 12 years in the major leagues, I do not feel that I am a piece of property to be bought and sold irrespective of my wishes. I believe that any system which produces that result violates my basic rights as a citizen and is inconsistent with the laws of the United States. It is my desire to play baseball in 1970, and I am capable of playing. I have received a contract from the Philadelphia club, but I believe I have the right to consider offers from other clubs before making any decisions. I therefore request you make known to all Major League clubs my feelings in this matter and advise them of my availability for the 1970 season. Signed, Curt Flood.
Curt Flood shocked the baseball establishment. I mean, he took it by the ears and shook it.
When he appealed to me to stop the assignment of his contract to Philadelphia, I said, no way I can or would.
Commissioner Kuhn professed not to see the relevance of his statement that he is not a piece of property to be bought and sold because this had been going on, said Kuhn, for years and years and years. Therefore, it's not relevant.
This is the system. You have to live within that system. Everybody else does, and you do too. And so the contract assignment is valid.
3 weeks after Flood's historic letter to the commissioner, he filed suit against Major League Baseball, contending the sport with violation of antitrust laws. The reaction among the players was mixed.
Most ball players of that mind at that time didn't understand what Curt Flood was doing.
I was shocked, and I was in the trade. Curt, you really want to do this? Do you know what you're doing?
You may never be allowed back into baseball. You sure you want to do this?
The Phillies were offering Curt $110,000. It was an enormous sum of money in 1970. Enormous sum of money.
I was upset at Curt because I thought it could hurt the game.
I told him I'd be with him 100%, but I'd be back a few hundred paces just in case some other ball out would hit him. I didn't want it to hit me, too.
With the exception of Curt Flood and maybe one or two others, every major star was totally in the pocket of the owners.
It was not just the players who criticized Flood's action. Once a favorite of the press, he was now in its crosshairs.
When we brought the suit, there were an awful lot of sports writers who thought of it as a kind of outrageous act.
He was viewed as a fascist, a terrorist. This was the reaction in the mainstream conservative baseball press.
You would have thought maybe he had gone around and killed babies or something. The reaction was so violent.
The other charge is that somehow it wasn't Flood's idea. Time and time again, he was portrayed as a pawn of Marvin Miller. Flood couldn't have thought of this on his own.
In the great tradition of the sporting press going all the way back to the 19th century, every time an athlete challenges the game, the sporting press fell to the occasion and supported the owners blindly.
With sports writers and stars in their corner, the baseball mavens locked arms and spoke in a single voice.
The owners were adamant, can't make any changes.
The game will be destroyed if there is no reserve clause. This will be the worst thing that ever happened.
We're all going broke. We're doing this just out of sportsmanship for the betterment of the community. We need the reserve clause.
The owners put out the notion that somehow Curt Flood, what he was trying to do, it was anti-American, that it was against the best interests of baseball, that it was communistic.
When you signed a contract to become a professional baseball player, you knew what the rules were. And if you weren't happy with the reserve clause when you signed your first contract, then don't sign it. You know, go do something else for a living.
Why didn't the owners understand what was happening? First word is arrogance. They had spent 100 years doing anything they wanted and getting away with it. They felt it was their right. Also, total lack of imagination. That they could function any other way than the way they've been used to function.
Whether it was a lack of imagination or simply a refusal to change, the baseball establishment firmly believed it would weather this most recent assault on the reserve clause.
I think the public thought Curt Flood was insane. I mean, they had never heard of this, somebody refusing a trade. And someone who would go to court over it.
But we had dinner with Marvin Miller and Dick Moss. Marvin Miller was as upfront and direct with Curt Flood as anybody could have been.
The bottom line was we were going to lose. And I wanted him to know that.
Flood elected to stay the course, despite strong suspicions that the owners would make sure that his good deed did not go unpunished.
He had an idea what was going to happen because he'd been warned by some attorneys that there's a possibility that he would get blackballed, he wouldn't win. He says, I'm going to do it anyway. I believe very strongly in this, and that's all to it.
And he suffered for it, emotionally, physically, financially.
He literally laid down his baseball life. Why would he sacrifice all that?
Curt Flood was born in Houston in 1938, the youngest of Herman and Laura's 6 children. When Curt was 2, his family moved to California and settled in a ghetto of West Oakland.
Curt was blessed with a very dedicated father and a very dedicated mom. They always had at least 2 or 3 jobs each, constantly working, constantly trying to make life better for them.
That family was a very artistic family, a very intellectual family, and always met the challenge in terms of integrity.
I got to know his mom very well, Laura, and she was a very positive person.
She had a restaurant at one time. She had one seat at the restaurant that everybody in the neighborhood knew that if you didn't have any money that day and you came and you sat in that chair, you could eat for free.
While their parents worked round the clock, the 6 children lived a latchkey existence. Curt formed a strong attachment to an older brother.
Carl was a little different cut. Carl would be a problem.
There were some other lifestyles that existed, and Carl got into that and couldn't get out.
Carl had stole a truck from a sawdust company. He went to juvenile detention. And Curt found out about it, so he stole the same truck so he could be with Carl. That's how much of an influence Carl had over him.
Curtis tried to drive the truck, and he was only 9 or 10 years old. The security guard caught him, and then they took him down to the detention home. He had to spend the night.
His father was just so hurt. His mother was just disgusted. And from that day on, Curt said, I never wanted to be in trouble again.
Curt started to play baseball on the sandlots of West Oakland. At 9, he caught the eye of George Poles, a well-known local coach.
He helped a lot of the youngsters in Oakland, California, because the area we were in, it was a very narrow line between okay and going the wrong way.
And the man was a genius. The man was ahead of his time. And he knew talent, and he knew how to work with talent. He was a good communicator. And he was a father figure and a mentor to the kids in the area.
I, to this day, give him credit for my career in baseball.
Frank Robinson and Bill Russell and Vada Pinson, Curt Flood. I mean, you know, there were some bad dudes come out of there.
He had an influence on all of us that were there, but he just took a liking to Curt.
Of all the kids that made it to the big leagues, Curt was probably his favorite. He brought him up to the Legion team and made him a bat boy. And then when batting practice was over, he got to hit.
That ball would jump off his bat. He could run. He could do it all.
He outran every kid in his neighborhood and caught for Junior's sweet shop team in the midget league.
He would make plays. I mean, you just stand and shake your head.
Everybody in the stands would just rave about this little kid that was there with 16, 17, 18-year-olds playing. Everybody just knew that he was going to be something special.
When the 5'7", 140-pounder wasn't patrolling center field for Oakland Technical High School, Flood pursued artistic interests.
I recall him being very serious-minded, very quiet.
A lot of us, when we were playing, we'd go out and mess around and do things. But Curtis, he would go back to the room. He would paint. He would write poetry. He would work on the guitar, all to develop himself.
He was so artistic that he would paint the big banners that were hung in the hallway preceding each assembly.
Kurt's the kind of kid that could grow on you right away. He was inquisitive, intelligent. You'd be happy to take him home.
But Flood's days in West Oakland were soon to end. Ahead of him lay a journey into the heart of America, where he would gain fame for his athletic talent and suffer banishment for his belief in the rights of man. After graduating from high school in February of 1956, Flood signed a $4,000 contract with Cincinnati and reported to its Class B team in High Point, North Carolina. As a black man in an era when Jim Crow still stalked the South, he suffered a severe sense of dislocation.
He said he had never felt so isolated and alone in his entire life.
You could not eat in restaurants. You couldn't stay in the hotels with your teammates. On the road, your teammates would have to bring food out to you, cold.
In the clubhouse, they had partitioned off a space for him, but the partitioned off space was not in the clubhouse. It was outside, and it was made out of corrugated tin, like a little shed, and it didn't have a door. It just had a cloth. He said it was hotter than hell in there, and that's where he had to dress. The more they treated him in such a disrespectful way, the harder he played.
Stuffing the pain, the 18-year-old hit 29 homers, drove in 128 runs, and led the Carolina League with a .340 batting average.
He was wearing number 42 because number 42 symbolized the greatest number in baseball for Curt.
Jackie Robinson was his hero. He was the kind of man he wanted to be. Well-spoken, well-dressed, able to sustain himself under all kinds of pressures.
After a second season in the minors, the buzz was that Flood would soon join neighborhood friends Frank Robinson and Veda Pinson in the Reds outfield. But Cincinnati management had other ideas.
Because they had the potential of having an all African-American outfield, they weren't ready for that yet.
And there was a quota on a lot of ball clubs. If you saw a few in spring training, the Major League camp, and there's more than 4, you say, someone's got to go.
Bertie Tevis, who was our manager there, thought he was too small. So that winter, we traded him to St. Louis for 2 pitchers. They never did turn out good.
He says, oh, goodness, here I go. I'm going to St. Louis, that city where Dred Scott ruling came down. I was trying to do anything I could to get completely out of the South.
But you were the team 1 or 2 years, and you're going to get upset to be traded. No, you want to stay in the big leagues. Because in those days, they could send you to the minor leagues and you'd never be heard of again.
He was happy to be in the major leagues wherever they sent him. He was happy to be in the major leagues.
Batting .261 as the Cardinals' rookie center fielder in 1958, Flood faced a familiar problem, more complex than a major league curveball. This time, however, he wasn't alone.
Solly Hemus was named manager of the St. Louis Cardinals. And Hemus did not think very much of Gibson as a pitcher. And he took Bill White, who was one of the finest first basemen in the game, and played him in the outfield. And he did not think very much of Curt Flood as an outfielder. And so for that entire season, those 3 guys are looking at each other. They know the talent that they have, and they're wondering, why are we being treated this way?
In the middle of the 1961 season, Hemus was replaced by Johnny Keane. Flood, meanwhile, had broken out as a hitter, his batting average soaring 85 points above the previous year. The lessons of a former teammate, George Crowe, had begun to pay off.
Curt had hit a lot of home runs in the minor leagues. And in the major leagues, he was just short by 10 feet. George pulled him aside and said, young blood, you know, you can't hit home runs up here. And George worked with him every day, hitting the ball to right field, bunting once in a while, hitting line drives rather than trying to drive the ball out of the ballpark.
He turned himself from an adequate major league hitter into a very good one.
From 1961 through 68, Flood hit over 300 6 times.
Curt Flood was a better ball player than they gave him credit for, I thought. He knew how to play. He knew how to win. He knew what he had to do on the ball field.
He'd do whatever you had to do to get on base to start a rally. He was really a professional. He never made any mistakes. When you needed something done, bunt a guy over, hit the ball to the right side, he always did it.
He'd take a pitch. He'd take 2 pitches if he had to get Brock in scoring position.
Lou Brock would get a hit, steal second. Flood would send him over to third. Maris would drive him home. The score would be 1-0. Gibson pitched a shutout, and the game was over.
Johnny Edwards was a catcher who was traded from Cincinnati to St. Louis after the '67 season. Johnny said, have you ever heard anybody genuinely pull for their teammates, even if he's 0 for 4 like Curt Flood? And here I'd played with Curt for 6 years, and I said, you know what? No.
You talk about teammates. Curt have to rate it #1.
Curt was one of the team leaders. Curt was able to diffuse many of the problems that we may have had. Real extrovert, loved to have fun, loved to laugh, always joking, getting on people, riding guys. If you made a mistake the day before, he'd be the first one to start the riding, and then, of course, everybody joined in. He had a way of saying things that made you chuckle, but if you thought about them a little bit, they were to the point. A lot of players back then were aloof to rookies, but Curt was always willing to talk to you, try to help you.
Players know. They know when it's phony. And the one thing about Curt, he was never phony.
In 1964, Flood amassed 211 hits and earned his second Gold Glove as the Cardinals won their first World Series since 1946, beating the Yankees in 7 games.
Gibson delivers, swung on, popped up. Maxwell at second base. Collinsford makes the catch. The Cardinals win it, and this ballpark, complete bedlam.
But for Flood, the victory celebration was swallowed whole by an incident that occurred outside his house in California.
Most of us lived in the inner city area at the time. Curtis ventured out. He moved over to one of the suburban areas called Alamo. And they burned a cross on his lawn.
The notoriety that's undoubtedly going to be involved here will make people aware, if nothing else, that prejudice is not only confined to the southern part of our United States, and if they move their mustache and look under their nose, they find it right here at home, too. It's unfortunate, but it's certainly the truth.
We weren't wanted. We had to have the marshals escort us into the house. It was very hard.
I knew he was very upset about it, and that sometimes he was actually scared.
Flood returned to St. Louis, leaving his wife and children in California. He and Beverly would later divorce.
I think for my father and my mother as well, they wanted to be away from the hustle and the bustle, and a place where my father could really get into his art and be alone. And there was so much commotion going around us, even in the home, that was rather difficult.
In 1967, Flood's career-best .335 average propelled the Cardinals to their second World Championship. Winning his 5th straight Gold Glove, Flood was among the best center fielders of his era.
First time I saw Curt Flood, and I hit a ball in the right center field gap. I'm hauling around first base, just know I had a triple. Halfway in between the umpires, says, "Hold, first and second." I looked up, and he's trotting in with the ball.
Gibson said, talking about Curt Flood's catches,
like standing on a corner watching the girls go by. The last one is always the prettiest.
He made a play at Wrigley Field one day when he used the vines for leverage. Had the ball been 3 feet over the stands, you would have sworn that he would have gotten the ball. I still don't know how he did it.
He was just spectacular. The irony, of course, being the thing we remember him most for is a misjudged fly ball.
It was Game 7 of the '68 World Series. With runners on first and second in the 7th inning of a scoreless game, Detroit's Jim Northrup stepped in against Bob Gibson.
Fly ball, Flood. Hey, almost thought he misjudges it over his head.
He stops short and actually kicks up a bit of the turf and heads back as fast as he can, and it's over, and Jim Northrup has a triple.
Flood's misplay led to 3 runs. Detroit went on to win the series.
After the game, Flood was just, devastated that he had misplayed that fly ball that he had put in his back pocket hundreds of times. And he told Gibson that it was his fault he lost the game.
Off the field, Flood was changing with the times. The 31-year-old star was among the first players to articulate a new spirit of independence.
We offered Curt Flood a contract for $90,000. He said he wanted $100,000.
When you take a stance like this, you're going to ruffle some feathers. Some of the feathers that you ruffle may be the owners that pay your salary.
Gussie Busch didn't like players who were uppity. Didn't like anybody who rocked the boat. And Flood was one of those guys who rocked the boat.
He went from a guy that was Gussie Busch's personal favorite to a guy that got the owner kind of unhappy with him.
Flood settled for $92,000, and in 1969, his average dropped under $300 as the Cardinals finished in 4th place. But Flood's life away from the field continued to be rewarding.
He had the Curt Flood portrait and photography studio that was doing well. He was well thought of. He had been the man of the year for St. Louis. A wonderful life.
He was approached by people for autographs, and he was always accommodating, never rejecting, always with a smile on his face.
The organization, Aunts and Uncles, was very, very close to Curt's heart. They made sure kids had shoes. Shoes to go to school, shoes to protect themselves in the wintertime. He said a new pair of shoes can change a child's outlook on the whole world.
He was at the height of his game, one of the highest paid players in the history of the game. He really literally had everything.
All he lacked was freedom in the industry where he made his living. And to Curt Flood, that was tantamount to slavery.
Ball players were rather late in our national history in acquiring the elementary right to negotiate terms of employment with the employer of your choice. Is not radical.
Curt saw the total picture. He understood the economics of the game. He understood the manipulation of the players.
The ultimate manipulation of Curt Flood began in October of 1969 when he was traded to the Philadelphia Phillies as part of a 7-player deal.
He was devastated. That's all I can say. He was devastated.
I saw Curt the day after he first received the phone call about being traded, and he was as dejected, upset, angry as I had seen him under any circumstances. And he had made up his mind before I saw him that he wasn't going to Philadelphia.
One could sympathize with him emotionally. He apparently liked being in St. Louis. He didn't want to be in Philadelphia.
Primary in his mind was not being traded. If worse comes to worse and I have to go, I don't want to go to Philadelphia.
Flood was a very articulate, sensitive black man who was being traded to a city that traditionally was inhospitable to black players.
It was, after all, the last National League team to sign a black player 10 whole years after Jackie Robinson was signed by the Dodgers. Like so many family-based ownerships, the Carpenter family was, without a doubt, steeped in this plantation mentality.
Heck, I played in Philly. I think Bob Housen sent me to Philly as punishment because nobody wanted to play in Philly then.
Had he been traded to the Dodgers, it may have been a different scenario, but he wasn't. He was traded to Philadelphia, again, a hotbed of racism.
I disagree vehemently with that. I hunted Flood down after it became apparent that he wasn't coming and asked him, was Philadelphia's reputation a huge factor in your decision? He said no.
He genuinely felt, as a professional baseball player, that he should have the right to seek his own employment with whatever team that wanted his services.
He was truly offended by the whole idea that players were property.
It's been written, Curt, that you're a man who makes $90,000 a year, which isn't exactly slave wages. What's your retort to that?
A well-paid slave is nonetheless a slave.
It was a system of economic slavery. And if you were a black person, you were probably much more sensitized to that relationship.
This is 1969. We had just endured 10 of the most tumultuous years as African Americans since slavery. People were dying in jungles in Vietnam. People were being hosed down in the streets. And here he was living in a penthouse in St. Louis, playing for a Major League Professional Baseball team. This was an opportunity for him to make an impact, and to make a significant impact.
The times were asking and demanding of people. The more you knew, the more you had to stand up.
White ball players something like that would happen, they'd feel frustrated or angry, but it wasn't a reminder of what had been done to their grandparents and great-grandparents. But with someone as proud as Curt Flood, it hit the nerve, and he was willing to act upon it.
He was inspired by the Martin Luther Kings, by Malcolm X. And he said, you know, this is where I have to make my stand. One of the things I said to Curt was, if by some miracle I'm wrong and the Supreme Court reverses itself, you're not going to win. And Curt, to his everlasting credit, said it would benefit all other players and future players. And I said, yes. And he said, that's good enough for me.
The trial of Curt Flood versus Major League Baseball began on May 19, 1970 in a New York federal district court. The weight of history was against him.
Curt Flood was up against, first of all, Oliver Wendell Holmes.
In 1922, the Supreme Court, in an opinion written by Justice Holmes, ruled that baseball was not subject to the antitrust laws.
Our argument was that the Supreme Court had made it clear in the intervening years that the law had changed, and there was no reason why this anomaly of the baseball exception should be continued.
Especially since every other major sport in the country was subject to the antitrust laws.
We had to get Holmes overturned. Well, getting Holmes overturned is like getting the greatest deity you can imagine overturned, because he was and is venerated as a great, great jurist.
To diminish the ghost of Holmes, some of baseball's most respected elder statesmen testified on Flood's behalf. Among them, the brilliant Maverick owner Bill Veeck, the legendary home run hitter Hank Greenberg, and the man who changed the color of the game over 2 decades earlier.
When Jackie Robinson walked into that courthouse, he said the whole room, you could hear a pin drop.
His presence was overwhelming because he was Jackie Robinson.
Over the years, there had been hearings in Congress. They were known as the Cellar hearings in baseball. And Jackie had, in the 50s, testified at one of those hearings.
Under instructions from the owners, but nevertheless, he had testified that the reserve clause was absolutely necessary, that baseball couldn't do without it.
Jackie's response was that I was very young then, and I have learned a lot playing baseball, and I was wrong.
And I am now much older and hopefully not as foolish.
Tears came to his eyes. He said it was a very moving moment for him to think that his childhood hero was there for him.
Childhood heroes and giants of the past, yes, but not one active player found his way to that courtroom in Lower Manhattan.
The Henry Aarons, the Stargills, all these guys, the Frank Robinsons. Where was these guys? Where were they?
Just one of them had stepped up and said, hey, what he's doing is right. He wondered what difference it would have made.
and it hurt him.
But these guys, man, I ain't messing up my 80,000. I'm not jeopardizing my family.
I still had a few more years that I wanted to play without having the ownership of baseball and not be happy with me. So I probably wouldn't have had enough courage to do that.
The reason nobody backed Curt up is because he was more or less expelled, blackballed from baseball, and it would have happened to anybody else too.
You mean to tell me baseball wouldn't have stopped and listened if they would have got together collectively? No way in the world. Baseball would have stopped and took notice.
But as the trial dragged on week after week, the ground upon which Flood stood alone began to erode.
I spent enough time with him and had enough meals and lunches and dinners and so on to realize that he was drinking more and more.
He was constantly being sought after by reporters. He was constantly under financial pressure. The photography business was not supporting him. There was nothing good happening in his life.
On August 12, 1970, Justice Irving Ben Cooper upheld baseball's antitrust exemption, thus preserving its prerogative to conduct business as it had for almost a century. His nerves frazzled, Flood fled to Denmark.
Heard he was just cooling out and doing some artwork.
One of the things that he remarked about the Danes was that they were colorblind and that they didn't look on him as being any different from anybody else, which was an experience that was new to him.
He could sit down and have a meal without someone bothering him, so he was anonymous there.
But after a year away from the game, Flood was ready to play again.
His body was calling for him to be back out on the field, doing what he'd always done.
Curt was expressing an interest in playing and talking about financial difficulty. He had already skipped one season. I don't think he wanted to skip a second one without at least giving it a try.
Bob Short, owner of the Washington Senators, negotiated a trade with the Phillies to get Flood. And in 1971, the former Cardinals star reported for duty under manager Ted Williams.
Ted gave him a hard time. He could come to spring training, he was ready to play. It was just Ted's attitude.
I had a lot harder time than I thought he would. I think probably harder than he thought.
He still caught the ball as well as he ever did. He didn't get along with Ted.
We finally had a little talk to him and told him for 4 or 5 days we're going to set him down.
Batting just 200 after 13 games, Flood faced something even more unnerving than the wrath of Ted Williams.
There was a letter in his locker in the clubhouse threatening his life.
It said, "Dear nigger, you're a dead nigger."
Now, how did it get in there, and who put it there? But I still don't think that's the reason he left. I think he only left because of the way Ted treated him. But Ted did not give him the respect that he deserved.
In a telegram to his teammates, Flood said, "I tried. A year and a half is too much. Very serious personal problems mounting every day. Thank you for your confidence and understanding."
Somebody said, "Anybody seen Curt Flood?" And somebody said, "He's on an airplane right now to go someplace out of the country."
He left everything. He left his family, his teammates. No one knew where he was for a while.
Painting, drinking, and trying to forget, Flood waited for news of his appeal on the Spanish Mediterranean island, Majorca. There, he managed a cafe where a primary topic of conversation was boxing.
The bar was there for the guys who were in the Navy. Howard Cosell would make sure Curt had all the tapes within 2 days or a day after a fight. So his bar was like the magnet.
In June of 1972, a phone call came from Marvin Miller. The Supreme Court ruled 5-3 against Flood's appeal. Justice Harry Blackmun wrote the majority opinion.
He was disappointed by the result, of course, but he was also disappointed by the opinion.
I never saw a decision in the Supreme Court which started out with literally several pages of nothing but baseball players' names.
I always have thought of it as Harry Blackmun's great mistake. He was a ball fan who loved Mel Ott and Willie Mays. Can't fault him for that, but you can wonder how he made so egregious a mistake.
It took him a decade to recover emotionally, inside. and to get past the pain.
What that lawsuit did was make everybody aware, and I mean everybody, not just the players, but the public as well, make them aware of how unfair the system was.
What the Flood lawsuit demonstrated, unfortunately, was you're not going to get redress on a major item like this from the courts.
But by creating the trial, Flood pushed baseball into positions that then it could not defend at the bargaining table.
In negotiations with the owners, Miller won a new collective bargaining agreement, which ultimately opened the way for free agency in 1976. That year, Flood flew into Oakland, financially and spiritually broken.
I met the plane that he came in on, and he brought all of his possessions back in a little overnight bag. And I didn't even know where to start to try to help him. He didn't have a job. He didn't have anything.
That's when we knew about the alcohol. It was one big mess. We got to Curt to say, you still got a lot of living to do. Your life is not over. And what you've done has not been in vain. So you need to crawl out of that bottle, get your life together, and move on.
I had stopped drinking, and he was on the same road, and he commended me and told me then that that's the road he was taking, and he regrouped himself.
He never went through any rehabilitation. He didn't attend AA classes. It was self-willed.
As Flood moved away from alcohol in 1978, he looked for a job in baseball.
His sin against baseball, in their eyes, was so egregious that he didn't have to be told that he wasn't going to get anything in baseball, and they didn't have to tell one another, don't hire ingrates. And clearly Flood was at the top of the list of the ingrates.
The one guy who tried to give Curt Flood a break was Charlie Finley, who was one of Bowie Kuhn's great adversaries. Hired him as a broadcaster. He did it to annoy Bowie Kuhn. I don't think Charles Finley had a bone of support for Curt Flood in his body. I just think he said, okay, let's put him on the broadcast team, and that'll really irk them.
After a season in the A's broadcast booth, Flood turned to card shows, old-timers games, and teaching baseball on the West Oakland sandlots of his youth.
To this day, people that see me on the street that were able to be coached by him said, in our whole life, the greatest highlight was to be able to play ball at 16 and have Curt Flood, not only as a teacher of baseball, but taught me things about life.
I was so happy to see Curt, and the same Curt Flood, you know, same smile, making jokes.
August Bush, the old man, came up to Curt and told him, I wish we had listened to you. You were right. You would have saved us a lot of money. That made him feel good.
Flood received further comfort from actress Judy Pace, with whom he had a relationship before he left the country in 1970. They married in 1986.
I feel like I was such a blessed person to have him come back into my life and into my children's life.
Curt was clean and sober. He was happy. He wanted us to understand that you can control whatever you want to do. You can change whatever you want in life.
Peace, joy, and happiness finally had come to Curt.
In December 1994, Flood found time for a cause close to his heart.
Curt Flood came to Atlanta during the strike and addressed about 100 players, and when he walked in the room, there was a thunderous standing ovation for him.
He wanted to speak to the players about the importance of their sticking together and the importance of what they were fighting for.
He had a real soft, kind of endearing voice, but you could hear a pin drop.
When he spoke, it was not only eloquent, but really with a passion of the commitment that he had made and what other players have done.
His message was simple. He said, don't let him put the genie back in the bottle. To me, that just sort of signified that the battle for players was always about rights.
It made us stronger. I think the guys were able to take that and pass it on to the other players and use it to our advantage.
With baseball and alcoholism long relegated to his past, Flood faced his last major battle in 1996.
We were in New York together at a meeting, and he was complaining of a sore throat.
He had throat cancer. And I remember writing a column about that and talking to him. And even then, in interviewing him, I didn't feel any fear.
Curt had this rule: don't let anyone in my room who's coming in here weeping and crying. I have no time for that. He said to come in here with lifted spirits and we all enjoy each other while I'm still here. If they're going to cry, take them out.
On January 20th, 1997, the man who had sacrificed his career for the rights of baseball players was gone at 59.
Curt Flood died late this afternoon in Los Angeles after a lengthy bout with throat cancer.
He was a very, very intelligent man. When his story was told initially by the baseball establishment, they tried to paint Curt as some bitter figure in the history of baseball that didn't want to be traded for selfish reasons, and nothing could be further from the truth.
Paul Allen, Bill Gates, they've made a lot of people rich. Have they made more people richer than Curt Flood? I don't think so. There's a lot of millionaires in Silicon Valley. But there's a lot more millionaires that have passed through the clubhouses of baseball. And it's all because of Curt Flood.
Because he put all that money in their pockets. He sacrificed the end of his career. And the best line I've ever heard on that was Joe Torre. When Flood died, I called Torre on the phone, and he called Flood the Joan of Arc of baseball. The man who was burned at the stake.
Like his idol, Jackie Robinson, Curt Flood lived to see the changes wrought by his courageous stance. And like Robinson, he died before his time. But if history celebrates the man who led his race across the color line, it all but ignores the one who set all players free. More than the millions that have since rained down on some with half his ability, Flood's obscurity may well be his ultimate sacrifice. For ESPN Classics Sports Century, I'm Chris Fowler.